My name is Dr. Chris Jenkins, and I am the CEO of the Orianne Society and the host of the Snake Talk podcast, the podcast where you learn about nature's most feared, maligned, and persecuted animals. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and maybe you'll find that what you perceive as fear is actually rooted in a deep fascination. Welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. We have an exciting one today. We're going to be talking about an organization that I've known about for quite a while, but I've actually known. I don't know much about the details. And, recently I saw an article in the media, and it prompted me to kind of dig a little bit deeper into this organization that again, I knew about, but didn't know, or I knew it existed, but I didn't know much about it. And it turned out to be kind of really fascinating what I found. So I wanted to talk to somebody and introduce them to all of you as well. So today we have Michael joining us from the Phoenix Herpetological Society to tell us all about it. So welcome to the podcast, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So I like to, we're kind of strange folks in that, in terms of in the eyes of most people in the world that, we actually really are fascinated by and oftentimes love these animals such as snakes and turtles and other things that people are often scared of or find icky, if you will. So I like to kind of start all my episodes by just kind of getting to the bottom of where that started. I think it's almost an interesting psychological project here I've been doing over the years. But so, Michael, where did it all start for you? This interest in snakes, is it something you've always had in you? Is it something you discovered later in life? How'd that come about?
It absolutely is something that I think has always been a part of my life. For me, growing up, I grew up here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Actually, where I'm standing right now is maybe only a stone's throw from the home I was brought up in. We're near Camelback Mountain, Fashion Square Mall. And an interesting thing about Scottsdale is that we're located in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, which there's a lot of really cool accolades about this desert. It's actually the desert that receives the most precipitation of any desert in the world. A lot of people don't realize that. I would say a lot of out-of-staters, when they come to Arizona, or transplants when they move here, and actually a lot of even native-born citizens of Scottsdale, look at the desert as being somewhat of an obstacle. There's spiky cactuses, the gravel is hot, and there are rattlesnakes. Our state has the highest biodiversity of venomous animals in the country, which is very interesting because it kind of makes us like North America's own little Australia. People here have to live with herpetofauna on an everyday basis. There are many species of lizards, like our chuckwallas, the Gila monster, which is the only extant venomous lizard in the United States. But then also a slew of snakes, gopher snakes, long-nosed snakes, and rattlesnakes. We have 6 species of rattlesnake that call this valley home. And it's quite interesting because, not only are rattlesnakes a huge part of our local ecosystem, they are a insurmountably large element as far as our natural heritage as Southwesterners. What would the Southwest be without the rattlesnake? It is such a critical icon as far as this city. And for me as a kid, it's actually kind of funny because as a child, I remember picking up gopher snakes with my bare hands, as early as 6 or 7, just finding them on the road, picking them up. I loved the reptiles, but as far as rattlesnakes, it actually wasn't until a bit later in my life that I first really got close enough to a rattlesnake to take a look at it. I think when you're brought up in the Southwest and in Arizona, once again, rattlesnakes are really seen as a looming threat, right? Most people are encouraged to keep their distance from rattlesnakes, which of course, I think even here at the sanctuary, we encourage people, yes, give space to wild animals, especially ones like a rattlesnake that could be potentially dangerous. But I think as I grew older, funny enough, I lived in Arizona growing up, went to school in Arizona as well. And then, funny enough, I actually moved to China, and I worked in the ecotourism industry for 2 years in China, leading clients to see wild animals, pandas, red pandas, all kinds of animals that make China special. But funny enough, I grew very homesick, and I really came to miss the Sonoran Desert. And when COVID happened in 2020, I was kind of forced to return to the United States, and it gave me, I mean, the pandemic, quarantine, that whole entire time period really gave me the perfect opportunity to explore nature and reconnect with my home. And like I said, I've loved reptiles since I was a little kid. I've kept them. I've gone to look for them in the wild. But it wasn't until really like that summer of 2020, 2021 that I first started running into rattlesnakes. And I actually was very grateful to find a community of herpers, which I think that was what I was missing as a child. Because when you grow up in urban Scottsdale, Arizona, people really ostracize anyone who has any interest in reptiles. I was definitely the weird kid in elementary school, high school, for my hyperfixation on reptiles. So I didn't really have that community to share in that interest until I came back as an adult, maybe 25 years old, moving back to Arizona and rediscovering the Sonoran Desert. And that's the first summer that I ever really went herping. That was the first summer I saw a tiger rattlesnake, a speckled rattlesnake, Mojave, western blacktail. All of these species, it was the first time I ever saw them. And I basically rocket ran it with some friends. We drove across the state, herping every night, cowboy camping out in the sandy washes. And that's really where my love for reptiles was galvanized. And funny enough, I know you have actually interviewed a friend of mine, and him and it was that summer that we were first introduced to the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary. So as a kid, I actually, since I'm, a little bit more south than where the sanctuary is, I spent a lot of time volunteering at the Phoenix Zoo. And I had heard briefly about the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary when I was younger. However, I just never really got the opportunity to visit. And man, do I regret that. But I mean, now I am a pretty integral part of the team, and I'm very grateful for that. But, I have been Team Herp since I was a kid. And it's a really incredible community at the sanctuary. I was first introduced to my previous manager, I think, in the summer of 2020. And it wasn't until maybe about a year or so later that I was looking for work. And I dropped them a line seeing if they needed a videographer. And funny enough, that was exactly what they needed. They were really looking to expand their virtual brand. And it was really a match made in heaven, as far as us finding each other, me becoming a part of the team. And
Yeah,
I mean, I think that sums it up to this point. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had it in you from a young child, but you were, you hadn't found your people yet, if you will. And when you found your people and were able to explore the
Yes.
world a little bit, it all came together for you, and led to where you are today. First thing I want to mention, I said in the intro, Phoenix Herpetological Society, and I know it's the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary, but I thought there
Yes.
was a society that was kind of behind the origins. Is that true, or do I have that wrong?
You're absolutely right. So we started as the Phoenix Herpetological Society. at our inception. And it was only recently that we decided to do a light rebranding, if you would. I mean, we are still the Herpetological Society. There's no need to correct yourself on that. But think of it more as an overarching entity that is the Herpetological Society. We like to refer to ourselves as the sanctuary, funny enough, because I mean, and I feel like this is accurate to say, but I think a big part of it was the perception of not wanting to come across as a esoteric society of reptile people. We are a
Mhm.
physical sanctuary that people can come and visit. I think that for a while people kind of had it in their head that we were some kind of exclusive reptile club, and we're quite the opposite. We want to share our message of loving herpetofauna with the entire world. And I think
Yeah.
that kind of going back to my earlier point is that at times our community can be a little bit esoteric to outsiders. So I think that that's a big part of why um, we did that rebranding, is we wanted to be
Yeah.
more approachable. We wanted people to know, oh, this actually is a physical location that we can come and visit.
Yeah, you rebranded because the society name was maybe like you as a child, where you were saying you were kind of the person put off to the side, and the strange kid. You were just
Exactly.
exclusive
Yeah.
in your interest, and this is, just something that's maybe connects with people more, just even the branding, but is maybe a little more inviting to people who want to be involved in different ways. So I like that. Well, let's. I'd like to talk about your role at the sanctuary in a little more depth. But first, why don't we? I mean, you touched on it, but I'd like to go in a little more depth because what I read on the website was, I thought, pretty interesting. But I'd like to talk first about kind of the history of the sanctuary, and I would go back as far as you can in time, and talk about that, the Phoenix Herpetological Society. How did that come about, and what were some of the transitions and important people and milestones that kind of got the organization to where it is today?
Awesome question. So this year we are turning 24. So for over 2 decades, the sanctuary has operated in some capacity. However, there has really been an evolution since day one to where we are now, that I think most people neglect to realize and would find absolutely fascinating. So our sanctuary was basically started by three individuals. There's Dan Marchand, who is our executive curator. There is Russ Johnson, who is the president of the sanctuary. And then there is Debbie, who's the vice president. So she's Debbie Marchand. So Debbie and Dan are married, and Russ, uh, he is the president. So they came together to basically create this sanctuary. And the physical location that the sanctuary is located is actually Dan's childhood home. So his father built that home in the mid 20th century. And I mean, it's a beautiful house, really, really gorgeous house. But I think that's one of the first things that people realize when they come to our sanctuary is like, oh, this is a private residential area in northern Scottsdale. This is a person's house, especially like when people actually will enter the house and they realize, oh, there's a kitchen, you know. But so much has built on top of that. I always like to make the joke with guests on tours that Dan is basically Matt Damon from We Bought a Zoo. He built a zoo, and now it is the largest reptile sanctuary in the country with about 1,500 animals. But it started with very humble beginnings. So Dan basically at the turn of the century realized that there was this overabundance of unwanted pet reptiles that were purchased as impulse buys. I mean, how many of us know about that as far as people in the
Mhm.
community, people making uneducated decisions without doing their research on what animals they're getting into. And the main one that really started the sanctuary was green iguanas. Green iguanas were all the fad in the later 20th century. Yeah. So a bunch of people had green iguanas that they could no longer take care of. Dan had extra property laying around. And I mean, between him, Debbie, and Russ, they all really had a love and appreciation for reptiles. And they realized, there are pounds for dogs and cats, but there really isn't a repository for all of these unwanted reptiles. And they realized it was an absolute tragedy that a lot of these animals otherwise wouldn't have anywhere to go. I mean, we see it nowadays, the amount of people who needlessly buy animals they can't take care of and then either, neglect them until they die or abandon them, and we can get to that point later because it's actually, like I said, we started with green iguanas, but the species that we are now kind of inundated with are much different animals. Absolutely. I mean, namely, the two most surrendered animals now at the sanctuary are African Sulcata tortoises and red-eared
That was going to be
sliders.
one of my guesses.
But
Wow,
yeah, so
one of my
our
guesses was going to be
facilities,
sulcatas.
yes,
I was going to guess
it
sulcatas
is.
and
I
one of
mean, we
maybe
have,
red-tailed boas or something. A snake that gets, you buy them pretty small, but
yeah,
they're common, but they get big. You know.
yeah. And I mean, that's a good point because we do obviously, as far as snakes go, the snakes we're getting the most often are probably going to be ball pythons and red-tailed boas. And I mean, we do so much to adopt animals out. That's a very big part of our facility as well. I mean, we're not just taking these animals in to care for them. We work very actively as far as facilitating adoption events. We're on Morph Market. We send animals across the country. If people pay for the shipping, we'll ship them to people across the country. So we work diligently day in and day out to adopt out all of these animals. But I can tell you right now, we have a herd. It's more of a horde of somewhere around 400 to 500 African Sulcata tortoises.
Oh
And
my!
you could
Wow.
adopt out one a day, and we're probably still receiving one a day. Like, I mean, maybe not necessarily one a day, but I guarantee you we get maybe 4 to 6 a week. So on any given day, we're probably getting a new Sulcata in.
Yeah.
And I mean, they
Uh,
are very sizable animals. They're the third largest species of tortoise. Yeah.
mhm. Oh no, I was just going to say I want to continue with the history, but I do want to get into the animals more. It's fascinating to me. That was actually the next direction I want to go.
Ah,
But with the
yes,
history,
yes, yes.
so you've got this house, this childhood house from the president, and this group of three dedicated people. But obviously today, there are multiple employees. There's yourself working in media. You've got a venomous person,
Yes,
and on, and you're
yes.
taking care of thousands of animals. So how did the society, becoming the sanctuary, how did that business grow over time through history to kind of support such a big infrastructure, big business?
That's a phenomenal question. Thank you for dialing me back in on that because it does get really, really interesting. So, like I said, you know, we have a backyard iguana sanctuary, basically. In the late, turn of the century, Dan has basically adapted some of his property to house these animals. Going from there, I mean, within the next decade or so, uh, we receive our first crocodilians, which were a pair of alligators, Charlie and Lucy. You can see them on display at our facility now. They were confiscated from a local homeowner in Mesa, Arizona, who had them in their backyard. Their neighbor looked over the wall and saw alligators in their backyard. We started helping Game and Fish as far as being the go-to de facto repository for illegal snakes, which you're not allowed to own non-native venomous snakes in Arizona as a pet unless you have the proper licensing, which is basically impossible for civilians to get here in Arizona. So we became trusted, and a big part of that was Russ. Russ Johnson is a dynamo as far as here in the United States. He is a trusted name by a variety of different federal and state law enforcement agencies, game and fish from other states. We receive we receive crocodilians and venomous snakes from as far as Wyoming or Idaho, because these states know Phoenix Herp is a place that these animals can go. So a big part of our history and gaining that momentum was building the rapport with law enforcement. Additionally, I think it's very interesting to point out that maybe as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, there were only 4 paid staff at Phoenix Herp. And now we have over 20 paid staff at Phoenix Herp. And basically, for the majority of our sanctuary's history, we relied on the dedicated work and contributions of volunteers. So a lot of the people who are running the facility now were volunteers for years. Our executive curator was my manager. He was a volunteer for 7 years prior to being hired on. And I mean, a lot of our Kale, the venom manager, he actually just hit, I believe, 20 years of service. So prior to working as our venom manager, he was a volunteer for, over a decade, well over a decade. He was volunteering with our facility. So the people who have been with us now and are running things put their time in. And Russ, our president, he's a volunteer. He doesn't get paid. He only contributes to our facility. So really, for us, this sanctuary it was a labor of love. The fact that it is where it is now is a recent development. So for the majority of our history, like I said before, we were running on homeostasis. We were keeping the animals were the main priority. It wasn't there wasn't really the luxury of, we're going to run tours, we're going to have offsite events. Those all came with time. So for us, like I had mentioned before, expanding out and radiating out from that core function for our facility, that involved, creating summer camps. And, to do that, you have to build a classroom. And so summer camps is a big one. Classes, we do the venom training. That's become a really big draw. Like you said, you read the NPR story that Kale was featured in. He's basically become an overnight celebrity. It's really, really cool. But for us, I mean, we do whatever we can, and we wear a lot of hats for the service of the animals.
Yeah. So the facility is funded a lot based on kind of fee for service type things. Like you have kids come to camp and I'm sure there's some fee there, or venomous training or things like that. And then I'm assuming
and tours.
You get a lot of donations, people pay to do tours. Do you also get funding from some of these municipalities, whether they're state or city, where you're doing a service for them and helping them, get some animals, say, that might be found in the city of Phoenix? Does Phoenix help support financially the operations of the sanctuary?
So the way our nonprofit is structured, we do not receive state or federal funding. So for us, we work for the money we get. And obviously, we receive donations from people, and we have some very generous benefactors and patrons for the facility who have been reoccurring donors. I mean, for us, we are affiliated with a lot of really high profile sponsors here in Phoenix, and it's helped us tremendously. But it was really a point of how this facility was built that we wanted it to be sustainable. And I would really say that's some of the accolades that I readily give to Debbie, Dan, and Russ, is that all of them are incredibly tactful businessmen. So not only are they reptile lovers, but they knew if they were going to make a facility like this, they wanted it to be sustainable, something that didn't rely entirely or solely on funding from other sources. So for us, we've become incredibly creative as far as the way that we raise money.
Mm-hmm. Snakes are one of the most persecuted groups of animals in the world, but we are dedicated to changing that. If you like what we've been discussing here on the Snake Talk podcast, here's an opportunity to turn that inspiration into action. Head over to www.orian.org and explore how you can support the Orian Society. Click on Take Action on our menu to make a difference. Well, you talked a little bit about the animals here and there. You mentioned some crocodilians and, your red-eared sliders and your sulcatas and iguanas is an important part of the history. Talk a little bit more about the animals that currently reside on the sanctuary and maybe kind of any interesting trends you've seen, kind of like you mentioned, iguanas turning more to now sulcatas and red-eared sliders. And then also, if you would,
yes,
kind of while you're talking about the animals, touch on a lot of what you talked about are obviously non-native to Arizona. How much do you work with, say, non-native species versus species, that are native to Arizona? And there's kind of a different way you work in those two spaces.
Absolutely. So, so tackling that for us, we have once again, 1,500 animals. And I think it's kind of interesting when you look at the ratios amongst those populations, right? For instance, we have many animals that are surrendered pets. I think that what makes us different than other zoological facilities is that we have a zoological collection. Our facility is permitted as a zoo, right? But we're also a sanctuary. And I think we're a sanctuary first in many instances, right? In the sense that the majority of our animals are surrendered pets that in all frankness, they create an encumbrance on our facility. We have 500 Sulcata tortoises that we need to source 1,800 pounds of vegetation every week to feed. And for us, we work very close. We have very generous partners as far as local Whole Foods and Costco's that donate produce, and then we pick them up 3 times a week. We'll ship in, produce that no longer is fit for human consumption, but is perfect for a Sulcata tortoise. And in addition, also maybe 300 red-eared sliders. We have a variety of adoptable animals that, once they go through a quarantine process and we've deemed them fit to once again be pets, they are once again eligible to be adopted out. So we have all of those animals. And once again, a big function of our facility and our keeper staff's role is making sure that people have a place where they can bring those animals in a mediated process. But then additionally, we have, if I'm not mistaken, we have somewhere around 150 crocodilians on property, and that actually represent 22 of the 24 species of crocodilian. I know I'm splitting hairs here because people now there's the West African Nile crocodile. Now I believe they just speciated out a new caiman. But for us, we have basically every species of crocodilian. So Cuban crocs, Siamese crocs, Papua New Guinea crocs, all of these really high profile endangered crocodilian species. We even have 3 Chinese alligators. And for us, we engage in species survival plans. So we're actually one of the only non-AZA participants in species survival plan for crocodilians, which is really, really cool. And once again, that's a big part of Russ Johnson's role in the facility. He's been able to earn the trust of other facilities around the world and procure these animals so that we can participate in species survival plans and produce viable young. For us, on a yearly basis, we're producing zoological grade animals that can be sent to other facilities. So that way it really takes the strain off of collecting them in the wild. Additionally, non-native venomous animals, I mentioned that to you before. And to your question about trends, this was actually one that I found really interesting. And when Kale and Russ first explained this to me, is that, about 10 years ago, a lot more people in Arizona owned cobras than you think. Like, a lot more people in our state had animals that they weren't allowed to have. And people, when you ask the older staff about this, you go back 5, 6 years, and we'd get like 3 or 4 cobras a year, which is kind of big when you think about it, as far as like Game and Fish bust these people and they trust us. They know that there is a place that these animals can go where they'll be safe. And it's actually kind of funny because, I mean, that was a trend. People just thought, oh, I'll own a venomous snake I can't own. Oh, I'll own a pet caiman or a pet alligator. We still receive alligators fairly often. We still receive crocodiles from time to time. Like, we'll get Nile crocodiles or Morlet crocodiles from time to time, or dwarf caiman. We get more crocodilians nowadays than we do venomous snakes. I think, oh my God, I'm gonna save that story for the end, because I have a good snake story that I'll save for the end. But basically, yeah, the venomous snakes that we receive are a bit more few and far between nowadays. But I think a big part of that was because Game and Fish cleared house once they realized that they had a relationship with our facility. So people have kind of wised up, and obviously we're not just out there to bust people. A big part of my role is, as the videographer, is I like creating video content that reminds people why these animals aren't good pets. In fact, our most successful video on YouTube right now is why are dwarf caimans bad pets, which they are bad pets. And a lot of people still argue with us on that. But at the end of the day, it's legal. You can't own pet crocodilian here in Arizona. You can't own non-native venomous snakes. And yet people still do it, and will receive them from time to time. But that's non-native animals. We also do so much as far as engaging the public on our relationship with native reptiles, which our state is blessed with some of the most fascinating reptiles in North America. Including, like I said earlier, the Gila monster, which is the only extant helidermid in the United States. Such a cool, fascinating lizard. 6 species of rattlesnake living in our state, or in our city, I should say. And so for us, like you had seen with that NPR article, Cale Morris, our venom manager, he has developed this awesome venomous rattlesnake removal training technique. And our staff is all trained to use it as well. So a big part of another hat that we wear, I should say, is that we do venomous reptile removals for people, and we'll remove non-venomous animals as well. And, every now and then we're pulling gopher snakes or long-nosed snakes off of people's yards. But typically people will call us out for rattlesnakes and for Gila monsters. Gila monsters, you need to call a facility that has a wildlife service permit like ourselves. So that's another way we engage the public. We also do desert safety trainings. So that is something that, schools will organize from time to time. We come and teach students about native venomous animals native reptiles in general, I should say, including the venomous ones, of course, just to give them a better understanding. Because once again, these animals are an invaluable part of our natural heritage and our ecosystem. So, Phoenix is growing larger and larger all the time. I was reading a statistic recently about our growth and development. I mean, we're one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the United States. And honestly, I mean, something that is a little scary to reptile lovers like us here in Arizona is that that development will not be sustainable. We want sustainable development. We want to encourage future generations of engaged ecological stewards, people who, you don't even need to love rattlesnakes the way I do or the way we do, just as long as you leave them be and you learn sustainable, non-lethal techniques for coexisting with the reptiles here in our state.
Excellent. So I want to kind of move into a number of the things that you guys do at the sanctuary, and we've been talking about them. We've talked a lot about that you obviously take in animals that pets that aren't wanted, that are surrendered, or animals that get confiscated. And you started to touch on education. I want to get into education more in a minute, but before we leave that whole concept of kind of animals coming in, being rescued in one form or another, being rehabilitated and potentially sent out. Talk about that being adopted out part of the sanctuary. How do you guys work to get some of these animals back out to people so they're not in your facilities forever?
Yes, I think it's such a double-edged sword, because when you've gone through the trouble of receiving these animals and in a lot of cases rehabilitating them, we sometimes receive animals that are in absolute abysmal states. I remember we got a box turtle once whose beak was so overgrown that it was stuck in the skin flaps of its shell and it couldn't push its head out. And it probably hadn't drank water or opened its mouth in weeks,
Wow.
yeah, honestly, that's a fair assessment. And I mean, that's one of many, many stories where we have to bring animals back to a state where they are not in danger of dying due to their care. So once they get to that point, adopting them out again is also a careful procedure, and that we handle delicately, because we obviously want people to be able to adopt these animals, but we also want to make sure that we're not creating a revolving door where these animals are being adopted to someone else who doesn't understand the requirements to take care of these animals, and then they will wind up coming back to the facility, or even worse, dying in that person's care. So for us, we have on our website, you can access our adoption portal. So basically, you just answer a quick survey and it sends an email request where we will get one of our staff members will contact you and facilitate an appointment where you can come and check out the animal that you're interested in. Obviously, like I said, we have 20 plus staff members now, but they also are busy taking care of a zoo of 1,500 animals. So it isn't like window shopping at a pet store. You email us saying that you want a ball python, you can come out and we will show you a selection of eligible ball pythons. That's just an example. If you want a Sulcata tortoise, same thing. You come out, you can check out Sulcata tortoises, but it's a regimented process. That's one way that we adopt animals out. Additionally, for us, we are constantly invited to different reptile expos on an annual basis. We'll go to the Sacramento Reptile Expo and the Tucson Reptile Expo every year. And that is also a really great opportunity for us to show off our selection of adoptable animals. And we adopt out plenty of animals at those expos every year. We are on Morph Market. So, and that is typically for some of our more high profile animals that are certainly in need of more experienced owners. Like, for instance, we did a really big push this last spring to adopt out a bunch of larger snakes, like over 7 feet long, retics, Burmese pythons, anacondas. We received those animals too. And we can't necessarily trust just anyone to take them. So we typically, that's a bit more of a mediated arrangement as far as, getting some proof to give us faith that whoever we're giving this 12-foot snake to can take care of it. We also, additionally, I should say that we're actually currently in the process of transitioning into regular adoption events. So we're actually going to basically determine a monthly adoption day where it becomes an open house adoption event that people can come. And we're actually very hopeful that this is going to work better, simply because then we don't have to handle singular adoption schedules, or as far as adoption appointments that have been scheduled. and instead kind of funneling all of those people into the specific adoption day. The main thing is we want to be there to let people know before they purchase these animals what it's going to take care of them. Because once again, I think our facility has countless examples of what happens when people bite off more than they can chew. And in most cases, this is not to discourage people from owning a pet reptile. If you're capable of owning a pet dog, chances are you could probably take care of, there's some reptile out there that you could take care of. But I think the problem obviously comes, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, is people's lack of understanding of reptiles biology. I would say one of the first and most foremost examples that I see all the time is shell deformities in tortoises. If you look out at our tortoise pens, we have many tortoises that are severely deformed in their shells. And this is caused by obviously metabolic bone disease. So, kind of just closing the gaps on those misunderstandings of these animals is really, really imperative as far as setting them up for success with owners that are well equipped at taking care of their specific needs. But yeah, is that
Great. Well,
sufficient?
yeah, that's perfect. So education wise, you've talked about, you do a lot of education work to, talk to people about pet ownership and so on. You've kind of covered that in a number of different ways. And you also do education around local and native reptiles and amphibians. Maybe touch on some of the other, I don't know if you'd necessarily put them within the education umbrella, but some of the other things that you guys do that are education oriented. You mentioned tours, summer camps, venomous training, maybe just anything else that would kind of fit in that outreach and education component that you do there at the sanctuary.
Honestly, we have endless options as far as ways that people can engage with the sanctuary. I mean, really, the sky is the limit. We really are not. We don't discriminate based on age or interest level or what you're trying to do at the facility. I would say some quick ones to rattle off. We have summer camps, like I had mentioned before. Currently, our summer camp is sold out. Well, I should say we have summer camps, spring camp, fall camp, winter camp. So we have camps throughout the year that are orientated towards kids, and then afterwards, of course, there is keeper and trainings. There are the opportunities to volunteer and actually gain more experience with our animals, which, as I mentioned before, most of our staff members were once volunteers. I'm honestly one of the only exceptions to that rule. I don't know why, but additionally, we have a lot of really fun activities and events that we plan during the summer. And I think this is a perfect time to talk about this is we have croc walks, which they are crocodile feeding events where people can come to the sanctuary. There's a limited number of seats, of course, but we do staggered feedings where people get to watch, maybe the saltwater crocodile launch out of the water to grab a chicken from a balcony. But then simultaneously, we'll have Kale in the venom room feeding cobras, feeding boom slangs, feeding vipers, what have you. So those are a really big draw. And if, you're in town in time for a croc walk, check that out. In Halloween or, Halloween season, we even have gators and ghouls, which is like everyone dresses up in costumes and we have costumed staff doing the crocodile feedings. And I mean, the whole facility, we roll out the red carpet and decorate the whole place. Additionally, we attend a variety of different events. Like I know Odyssey Aquarium every year does their conservation expo. We'll bring our trailers there. We do trailer events all the time. We do birthdays. We'll send educators to classrooms. We'll send educators to community centers if that's where the event is. So we do offsite education events all the time. There are private tours. With private tours, there are also a variety of different activity options that you can pile on, like our capybara experience, which I know this is a reptile podcast, but the capybaras are a really big draw at our facility. And we've found that they have brought so many people to a reptile sanctuary who otherwise would have never came. They just want to meet a capybara and then they realize, oh my gosh, like you guys have all but 2 species of crocodilian. Like that's insane. Also, and I know this is a tangent, but I'll mention it really quick because I think it just needs to be said, is that currently we are 7.5 years into the process of procuring the last two species of crocodilian that we don't currently have, which are the Indian gharial, the true gharial, and the mugger crocodile. And both of those animals, we are getting six of them. So just to put that in perspective for you, there are currently only two mugger crocodiles in the United States, and we're getting six. So we're going to have 3/4 of the captive population in the United States. And all of those animals are going to be allocated to a breeding project. So, if you want to come to a facility that is crocodile Mecca, like crocodilian Mecca, if I'm not mistaken, once we have every species of crocodilian, we will be one of three, if not four, facilities in the world to have that collection. So it's really a mecca, and the buck stops here.
Yeah. So endless education opportunities. I keep thinking, as you're talking about all these animals, especially these, like, say, sulcatas and all these crocodilians, like, you've got this house in a neighborhood. This must be a pretty big property, or is it all kind of, how does it kind of all fit together? Is it acres and acres, or is it all put together in a relatively
We've been
small
very
piece of land?
tactful. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So, if I'm not mistaken, the property is 2.5 acres. So we really pile it in. For
Wow.
us, I would say the majority of the property is allocated to the tortoise pens and to the crocodilians. So we have the whole southern side of the property is basically the South Croc Walk, as we call it. But yeah, I mean, for us, we just had to be very tactful as far as developing the sanctuary so that could accommodate the spatial needs of running the world's largest sanctuary. Yeah. It's fun to look at from drone. and like you said,
So
also, yes, we are surrounded by, I'm sorry, go on.
I was going to switch subjects, so continue
There was
what
a
you're
little
saying.
delay there, my bad. Oh, I was just gonna say it is fun being the world's largest reptile sanctuary in a private residential neighborhood because we have neighbors that are quite encouraging of this whole process, and we also uh, keep a very mediated rapport with the city of Scottsdale. It's necessary, just that way we're able to continue doing what we do. We try to operate within those parameters as respectfully as we can, because you could imagine it isn't hard to imagine that it is there could be complications that would arise from having a zoo in a residential neighborhood. But for us, actually, it really lends itself to our covert nature. We are not a public facility. People all the time somehow find our address, which I think Google posts it, but we do our best to kind of purge it from the internet because we don't want people to just come willy-nilly. That actually has led to many instances where animals are just dropped off and people drive away. People will come to our facility whenever they want and ask if they can just look around, and they don't really understand the nature of our facility. Like I said, we're not like the zoo or the aquarium where you just go up, buy a ticket, and walk through. Everything is pre-planned and scheduled through our website.
Whether you're passionate about preserving biodiversity, ensuring the survival of threatened species, or simply want to contribute to a healthier planet, there's a role for you. Your support isn't just a contribution, it's an investment in a future where our ecosystems thrive. Go to www.orian.org to donate or become a member today. Well, so you've really talked about, I'm thinking about conservation here. And first of all, you guys do an incredible amount of education, which obviously is an important component of conservation. You've also talked about, some of the kind of captive husbandry and breeding components of conservation programs. You're talking about some of the new crocodilians you're getting, and I'm sure there's probably some other species that you work with similarly. Do you guys ever kind of engage beyond the public education? Do you ever engage in conservation of reptiles in the wild? Is there any kind of projects, say in Arizona, that you guys kind of work with partners who are doing conservation work? Or are you primarily focused on that education and husbandry components of conservation?
So before I forget, I'll also iterate that it's funny you bring that up because the slogan of our facility is conservation through education. So we really
Oh,
do
great.
try to embody that. For us, educating is the first line of defense because ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it is our ignorance towards reptiles that has really led to their decimation in the wild. People view them as being impervious, very hardy, incapable of being eliminated. So why not just call them when they're on your yard and whatnot? But yeah, just a point, kind of saying, we really do try to embody that as far as education being one of the greatest bulwarks towards the means of conservation. So for as far as local conservation of local herpetofauna, our facility, for instance, like Kale, has been involved in research projects that involve our native reptiles. I would say the most intriguing and the one that is kind of currently a really big part of the facility, and it's going to become even bigger. You kind of got a bit of a glimpse through that NPR article, simply because that research that was featured in the NPR article goes a little bit more towards Kale's research project utilizing the robo leg, which that's become kind of like a meme. Even we've even received memes of Kale being stepped on by a rattlesnake holding a robo leg. Is very funny. I'll have to send you a picture. But as far as research, though, the implications of his current telemetry project are really delving into the behavior of rattlesnakes. Which, funny enough, as far as here in Arizona, there have been some other research projects that are similar to this. Mike Cardwell, who is Kale's mentor, did very similar work with radio telemetry. But basically, what Kale and the research that he's doing through the sanctuary is delving to understand is the long-term effects of the relocation process, which for us and for other facilities in town, there's a number of other facilities in town that also offer relocation services. I think one of the biggest ones, obviously, is Rattlesnake Solutions with Brian Hughes. And Brian Hughes is an incredible biologist who is very knowledgeable on this front. And we basically, since this has become such a big part of the strategy for how people coexist with rattlesnakes here in Scottsdale, Kale's research is really informing us on what happens after a rattlesnake is relocated. There has been science. There's been a consensus amongst wildlife technicians and scientists for a while as far as like what are the best practices for relocating a rattlesnake. I mean, one excellent example is that for the longest time people were convinced that if you relocated a rattlesnake, even maybe a western diamondback, outside of a 1 mile radius from where it was found, that its chance of survivability would go down drastically. And so as a result, technicians would be pulling snakes out of people's yards and looking frantically for some expanse of desert within a mile of where it was found that it could safely continue to live. And in some parts of the Phoenix metropolitan area, widespread development has made that basically impossible. Like, you pick up a rattlesnake in the middle of Scottsdale and you try looking for several acres of open desert, you're going to be hard pressed. So what we've started to learn, though, is that for specific species and in some instances, it isn't necessarily as big of a detriment as we used to believe. Additionally, I mean, I feel very privileged because I get to shadow Kale, basically filming him to produce some of the content showing off this stuff. So on the days that I get to follow him around, as he does his telemetry research, I am constantly surprised by the behavior of these rattlesnakes. I think one really cool example was a female rattlesnake with that Kale has put a transmitter, a telemetry transmitter in, that he has removed from the same house 3 times. So this animal, he'll take it back into the vacant desert and it comes back to the same porch, So we're learning more and more about how these animals operate and their habits. I mean, there's one rattlesnake. I just posted a video on it. Kale and I were tracking. His name's Mojo Jojo. I don't know. Kale named him after Powerpuff Girls characters. He's a very funny guy. But this rattlesnake consistently will go across this busy highway. Or I mean, it's a road, but it's basically a highway. It's like basically a 2-lane highway. I mean, there are always trucks and cars coming across. Kale found it one day with a huge, a huge injury on it that was consistent with a tire. So we believe that the snake was ran over, and by some miracle survived not only being run over, but the transmitter was still working. So he was able to continue tracking it, and the snake is all well and good now, but we still find him next to the road. He keeps crossing the road, even though he was ran over. He didn't learn his lesson. So it is quite interesting. We're learning a lot as far as like how these animals operate, and it's changing our understanding of their ecology and their behavior. Certainly. I will also say, as far as maybe some other smaller anecdotal examples, like for instance, our facility, we had Kale work with the narrow-headed garter snake breeding project. So when and if you're not familiar, I'll just refresh your audience really quick. The narrow-headed garter snake is one of our few rare endemic garter snake species. It's found in the Oak Creek watershed area. So, in the middle of the state, where you have this riparian habitat that snow melt from northern Arizona is going down. It actually creates a variety of creeks near the Mogollon Rim, which is the southern face of the Colorado Plateau. And this particular garter snake species was in real danger of habitat destruction and decline. And we teamed up with the BLM, with researchers from Northern Arizona University, such as Erica Novak, who she's a very accomplished herpetologist. Stuart Wells, which I actually have known him all the way back to the Phoenix Zoo. And he was the man who created the conservation center at the Phoenix Zoo and also started the cheetah breeding program at the Smithsonian Zoo. And I mean, we really, a confluence of incredibly knowledgeable conservationists working to protect this garter snake species. So for us, we don't breed the garter snakes, but it was really we played a big hand as far as bringing a captive population into a breeding program. So I mean, there's plenty of examples like that. I would say, as far as ongoing research that's happening right now, Kale's work, telemetry work with the rattlesnakes is very fascinating. And I would encourage you and any of your readers or your listeners to stay tuned on that, because there are fascinating updates coming all the time.
Yeah. Well, great. It's been good to learn a lot more about the sanctuary. There's just a ton of interesting and valuable things you're doing there, so that's great. And we'll put the link to your website in the show notes. But we should start wrapping this one up. We've been going for about an hour, but before we do that, I like to have all of my guests tell me their best snake story, and it sounds like you already have one in mind. So I'm excited to hear it. Tell us a good snake story.
I was honestly, I was trying to think of one, and I was a bit nervous that I wasn't going to be able to come up with one, but for some reason I completely forgot like one of the coolest snake stories ever, at least as far as something that I've experienced at the sanctuary, which is box mamba. So I just call it box mamba. We have a snake that its name is box mamba. It is a western green mamba. Um, and I would say that, when you work at the sanctuary for a long enough time, you start to pick up and accumulate stories. And this is one that I will never forget. Let's see. In the summer of 2023, our sanctuary was servicing the Sacramento Reptile Expo. Actually, I'm sorry. This was September. So it was in the early fall. We were servicing the Sacramento Reptile Expo. Our team had gone up there. I was with them to film. And while we were there, our good friends from Safari Encounters, Daniel from Safari Encounters, had gotten word that there was a local man in Sacramento who had a green mamba that he wanted to anonymously surrender to our sanctuary. And so this man brought a green mamba in a box, maybe about the size of a shoebox, with a little sliding latch door. And it had like one of those little metal latches to keep it closed, right? So it was slid closed and it had a little hanging latch on an eyelet to keep it closed, right? And he was able to somehow get it into the expo and hand it off to Daniel, who then subsequently brought it to us. And so when we received this animal in this box, it was explained to us that this animal had been in the box for well over a week or so. So it was basically Schrodinger's mamba. We didn't know if the mamba was alive or dead. We just knew the mamba was in the box. Schrodinger's mamba. Mm-hmm. And so we decided that this very surgical and precise procedure needed to be accomplished back in our high security venom hall, because obviously green mambas are one of the fastest snakes on the planet, highly venomous. For us, we have an anti-venom repository, and we have mambas. We have black and eastern green mambas currently, but we didn't have a western green. And so we brought the box back to Phoenix, 15-hour drive with a mamba in a box. And the instant that we get to the sanctuary, the first thing Kale does is take that box to the venom hall, into the high security room. And I come with him because we just both knew this was maybe something that we wanted to film. Because like I said earlier, we don't really receive venomous snakes anymore. It isn't very often. So we thought this would be an interesting opportunity to once again educate our viewers on why you shouldn't do this. So we brought it into the venom hall, and Kale takes out a tong. He, gingerly takes the little eyelet latch and opens it up, and he's able to slide open the door using the tongs. And within a minute or so, he's peering down into the box, and he's just trying to kind of move some of the substrate that was inside of the box to the side to see what's going on. He says, "Oh, I see something. It looks green. It looks like a mamba." And he's trying to get the tongs to grab the snake. And I'm filming in the corner. I'm standing in the corner filming. And Kale says, "I think he's sleeping." And within maybe a millisecond, this green ribbon of a snake, maybe 5 or 6 feet long at least, shoots out of the box and starts slithering directly towards me. And I couldn't film anymore. And, I started to dance, just trying to make sure, that I could effectively get out of the room. But yeah, Kale and then also our other really dedicated venom keeper, Lewis, were able to get a hold of the mamba with the tongs pretty quick. And we put it into one of our big plastic trash bins and sealed it up. And now that animal is on display at our facility. So people are able to come to our facility and see box mamba. And it was really like one of the most exciting moments of my 2-year tenure working with the sanctuary. I'm sure there's going to be more experiences like that. I've filmed plenty of crocodile I've filmed plenty of crocodile wrangling and stuff like that, but that was the first time I've ever had a green mamba, slithering right at me. And funny enough, that video, I think a specific reason why that video, or I should say that story is very important to me, is that as a videographer, we had a bunch of GoPros in the room, kind of filming third person, catching all of the action. And it was really just a fun video to film. And then additionally, it was just across the board a viral hit. Like, people were freaking out. They're like, who the heck sent you a mamba in the box? Like, they're trying to assassinate you. It was honestly kind of a firestorm, and it worked as a catalyst, almost like a defibrillator. And when that video posted, we started seeing exponential growth, which obviously, I think that a lot of people kind of were under the assumption that we staged that event, or that we were doing it in a manner or in a way that was specifically like sensationalist as a ploy to get more views. But honestly, we were just, Kale, like I said, has been doing his job for 2 decades, and he's never been bitten once by a venomous snake. And I mean, I think in this day and age, it's almost a rarity. There's so many people that work with animals that on YouTube or in those realms that they cut corners. And I think for Kale, something that I really appreciate about him, and that I think a lot of people should appreciate about him, and I mean, certainly HR appreciates about him, is that he is a very methodical and technical man. He uses every precaution in the book. So I don't know. Box Mamba takes the cake, and I love once again, I
was just gonna say, great story, and I hope
anyone, it's a great video to watch. Check it out.
Yeah, go check out the video, and like I said, we'll put the web link in the show notes. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on today, Michael. I had a good time. I learned a lot, and just a generally good conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Great. And I just wanted to thank the audience and tell everybody to remember, snakes are animals too, and it's a privilege to see one in the wild.